When I was a kid first getting into Minecraft, I remember spending countless hours loading into a new peaceful world and grinding diamonds like I had a mortgage to pay. I was a madman. I'm pretty sure 14-year-old Brock thought that the year was 1957, and he literally was a coal miner in West Virginia. This was just one example of many different times in my life when I have fallen completely in love with Minecraft. But lately, I've been in a bit of a rut with this game, and it's time that we fix that. So join me over the next 100 days as I relearn how to actually have fun playing this game again. Our journey begins on day 3,803, ironically, but we'll go ahead and call it day 1 so that my fragile brain doesn't implode while trying to keep track of the days during this recording. Speaking of fragile, I now have the defense of a wet pool noodle thanks to my new trendy cursive binding leather armor that we got in the last video. And thanks to my farming efforts to get this armor, I've pretty much left this place looking like a regular Minecraft village that needs a haircut. So it's time we show this place some love. I began by tearing down this house that I apparently had borrowed blocks from in the last episode, as well as removing buttons and filling in these ugly holes. I spent the rest of that afternoon reshaping the land a bit before nighttime was here, meaning it was time to test my new armor against a local mob and gauge how long I will still have a pulse in this world. How much damage does this do? Half a heart per hit? That's not too bad. The only real trouble now are skeletons, which can easily turn me from a melon man into melon pulp if I get caught in a mosh pit with them. I spent the morning of day 2 wondering what sort of psychedelics the Mojang devs were on when they generated this village and taking matters into my own hands. Just as I was getting used to the peace and quiet of having my villagers locked away in a dungeon, a basement, I was greeted by an angry toddler in my house. There's a baby in my house! That's okay, nothing some clever signage can't fix. All of that terraforming around the base had me quite short on dirt, however, so I took to the countryside to collect some. I made sure to make it look natural though, so as not to disturb my good buddy Looney across the pond. On the way home, I was ambushed by 2 spiders with speed potions, as well as finding a wannabe scarecrow in my wheat field. The next morning, I said something, but my mic was muted. Don't worry, it probably wasn't important anyways. Before going through and hoeing all of the pathways this village came with, since they lead literally nowhere. And that's it. That's all I did for the entire day. Realizing now that I must live with the consequences of my own silly actions, I started constructing a plan. If I want any chance of feeling enjoyment during the next 100 days and beyond, I'm going to need to design my base such that it's very difficult to die. Speaking of my own actions, what kind of scoundrel puts their nether portal in the very bottom of a cave like this? Anyways, after collecting some netherrack and having a complete panic attack trying to leave the caves, I don't like it here, it was time to get to work on day 5. Did I really just break my diamond sword collecting bamboo? Oh my god, I broke a diamond hoe too. What am I doing? At this point, I decided the only thing wrong with this village was everything in it. So I spent day 6 focusing my efforts on clearing away trees and vacated villager houses, which just so happened to be all of them. These destruction efforts continued their way through day 7, including but not limited to the local church. That night, however, I was faced with quite an interesting conundrum. Oh, don't tell me there's phantoms here. Don't tell me there's phantoms. Aha, and there's a creeper, but look what I got. Look what I got! You're both scared of me! The next day, I caught wind of a potential visit from PETA regarding the living conditions of my farm animals, so I played things safe and murdered every last one of those suckers. Look man, I have no time for any lawsuits over these 100 days. On day 9, I thought I would switch things up. So instead of terraforming, I did some terraforming. Doing this terraforming was honestly a much needed break from all of the terraforming I had done so far. I also attempted to go caving, and by attempted, I mean I saw these skeletons and turned the hell around. Nope. Nope, nope, nope. I spent the day continuing to fix the terrain whilst thinking of a passive-aggressive email to send to the Mojang devs regarding their terrain generation. I also discovered that basically any nighttime work is now best done in third-person mode, considering a creeper sneaking up on me is the real threat to the series at this point. The following day, I went through and destroyed all of the crop fields that I spent so long growing in the last video. And after a much-needed Efficiency 4 shovel enchant, I leveled out the remaining terrain. I'll be honest, right now, my Minecraft world was feeling kind of messy. I started having flashbacks to my recent move in real life, where like the first thing I did was set up my office and get to work. Meanwhile, my entire garage was full of clutter and boxes. I mean, yeah, sure, this base had been functional so far, but at the end of the day, it's not a place I'm excited about calling home. But the fact that I at least wanted to change it for the better, that was a good enough place to start. Despite my entire base being pretty much destroyed at this point, I finally had enough clarity to envision what this place could potentially look like. So I began outlining where I wanted the actual crop fields to go. With the outline of the village in place, I went through and determined the proper center, which I outlined with a big circle. In case you forgot, the main goal of Minecraft is actually to make this block game feel less like a block and more like a circle. The rest of that night was spent killing more spiders with speed potions. Man, I really gotta find their dealer for science. On day 13, I gave myself access to my elytra again, because haven't I been through enough already? All jokes aside, in the last video when I threw everything away, this was the only thing I kept because I knew one day I would need it again. I set off to find myself a spruce sapling. Much like your average motorcycle rider, these wings offer very little protection, but do help me overcompensate for my average looks by making me think I look cool. I will need a ton of spruce wood for my plans, so later that day, I set up a makeshift tree farm area that looks terrible, but that's okay because it's outside of my village. It's important to recognize here that I make all of my villagers sign a contract that actually allows me to wake them up in the middle of the night and trade things whenever I want, which was nice because it allowed me to get a much needed axe upgrade at 3 a.m. And then this happened. Dude, what? Why is there so many zombies? What is this? What is going on? I spent the next morning collecting more wood before laying down the framework for what will eventually be a proper village wall, since apparently my one tall netherrack outline won't protect me from, well, anything. I kept the block palette pretty simple here, alternating between oak wood and spruce wood, which will hopefully provide some nice contrast to the cherry forest in the background. As I'm sure will be the case throughout many parts of this video, I came nowhere near to finishing this in one day. So the following day, I went through completing the outline and then stripping the spruce wood. I also took an opportunity that evening to trick shot some zombies in an effort to make Machinima's top 10 plays this week, really hoping it's the one, before continuing up the wall building. I'll save you the headache of watching me mindlessly place logs and just cut to right about here. Really not much happened in this time. I mean, besides chopping and placing a stupid amount of oak logs, I did manage to snag some melon seeds from a wandering trader, which I definitely didn't murder, as well as trap a pillager captain in this boat, which I'm sure will definitely be used later in this video foreshadowing. By now it was day 19, and I started off that day pretty chill by digging out some watering holes that would eventually hydrate my crop fields before doing some enchanting. I managed to get both a Fortune 3 pickaxe and, thanks to my villagers, a Silk Touch bad boy, which is exactly what I needed. I set off flying and got completely sidetracked, finding out that I do in fact have neighbors, before setting out in search of a frozen river for some ice. Aha! I found one! A frozen river. It should not have been this hard. I knew there was one over here though. Filling in water sources one by one with buckets makes me want to rip my hair out, so having a few stacks of ice to aid in that will just make my life so much easier. I was, however, a little bit overzealous in the ice collection, but that's not really a big deal since these are all in unloaded chunks, meaning that the next time I come back, it should all still be here. The next morning, I began digging out the central circle a bit. I'll be honest, like most things I do in life, I have no idea what my plan is for this. All I know is I want it to be a big hole with something in it. You'll have to let me know. But at the very least, right now, it's a very good way to get some blocks. By now it was day 20 and even though there was still so much work to do, I was just starting to overcome the initial friction that comes with a new project in Minecraft. It was very subtle, but I was slowly beginning to enter that autopilot mode. I put all of the stone that I just collected to good use and began outlining a structure for what would eventually serve as some elevated crop fields. After building up the first retaining wall, I soon realized that once again my plans for world domination were being foiled by terrain generation. But no worries, after reshaping more of the land, I landed, landed, on some shapes that I think work pretty well. Now all there was left to do was fill in the remaining dirt and bam, we got ourselves a great place to grow some crops. Next I went through adding a trim of cherry wood along the edge of the retaining walls, which honestly I don't think looks all too great. I also tested out different accents along the edges of the walls, only to find them very ugly and revert back to the original. Now would have been a great time to actually plant some crops up here, but unfortunately I won't gain access to the plants that I need here until much later in the playthrough. And thanks to all of that derping around, it was now day 24, and I refocused my efforts to the lower area, going through with ice and adding in more water patches. Using oak leaves, I began slowly creating borders, with this idea that they would separate the different patches of fields. Much like me at the 8th grade school dance, this remaining villager house was horrendously awkward and looked quite out of place. So I spent the morning removing it and instead adding a simple ladder entrance with a trapdoor. Honestly, I don't know why I didn't do this sooner. Luckily though, this gave me the space to continue my leaf placing well into the night, where I spotted this local iron golem having a really terrible time. By sunrise, all of the leaves were in place, and this area was looking more like a spider web than anything at all beautiful, but sometimes you just gotta give things a chance, man. That morning, I did some more trading with my villagers to get a mending book on my shovel and repair it with the help of my farmers. My previous terraforming efforts left this rather sizable divot in the ground, which honestly, I thought for a while would make a cool detail, maybe like a pond or something, but I decided now I better just fill it in. With things more flattened out now, though, I was able to now go through and outline a very rough pathway as well as install these little fence gates to connect up the area a bit. The area was beginning to enter phase 2, which meant that I actually needed to start placing blocks and making it look semi-good. But I'll be honest, I wasn't mentally ready for this part yet. You see, I have spent the last 4 months not only traveling and moving into a new house in real life, but also taking advantage of some amazing opportunities to experience a different side of Minecraft than I'm used to. More on that later though. So on day 27, I took an entirely different approach to the game and spent the entire day fishing. This is basically like the Minecraft equivalent to one of those days where I end up just playing Valorant for 6 hours instead of editing like I'm supposed to. But apart from being a much needed mental reset, this day spent fishing was not a total waste. Immediately, I put all of the fish to good use and began breeding up some of the local village cats, which will come in handy very soon. Feeling a bit refreshed from my time at sea, I spent some more time that day widening my pathways and installing some more water sources. It was finally time to start replanting all of my crop fields. After all, my villagers probably haven't eaten in at least 10 business days. I went through tilling the soil and planting in carrots, potatoes, and wheat seeds at differing elevations, making sure to take time and breed up my cat army in between. I spent the rest of that evening chopping down spruce wood, where I had an interesting run-in with this zombie. The next morning, I accidentally bought way too many pants from this man before purchasing myself a new diamond sword. Wow. After trading with my farmers for some more levels, I rolled a looting 3 enchantment as well as lined up a smite 4 enchantment, which I intended to use very soon. Unfortunately though, my villagers were now on strike, protesting the 16-hour workday I just put them through. So I spent a while that night collecting some more stone before picking fights with the locals to get levels that way. The next morning, I watched this man get absolutely manhandled before revisiting my villagers for some more XP, since they were no longer mad at me. Finally, I collected the new Smite 4 sword, and before long, I had a new and improved weapon that was much better than the junk I was using previously. That night, while chopping some more trees, I had a pretty good opportunity to put this bad boy to use, and might I say, it does a pretty fine job. Day 32 was a good one, not just because my kitten army was now reaching max capacity, but because it was finally time to start that new project that I have been hinting at. I flew out to the nearby ocean to scout locations before setting up a chest to hold all of my relevant materials. Like pretty much everything I do in life, I could only assume that I've grossly underestimated what this new project will entail. So I spent the rest of that night collecting more stone, dirt, and wood than I thought I would need. Bright and early the next day, myself and the kitten crew set off to find their new home, which, if you haven't gathered it by now, will be in the creeper farm we are about to build. Straight away, I got constructing these dirt platforms in the ocean, which was a great opportunity to practice the teleport trick that I've been training them to learn the past few days. With all of the cats in place, I started constructing a dirt pillar all the way up and began building the creeper farm the only way I knew how, from the bottom up. This first area is going to be the kill chamber, aka where the creepers fall and meet my looting 3 sword. The next morning, it was time to build up the central funneling system, which basically catches the creepers in water and then pushes them into the drop chute. You see, nothing makes me feel quite brain dead like watching a Minecraft tutorial, so I'm really trying to avoid watching one and go purely off memory for this farm instead. This did mean, however, that a fair bit of trial and error was required to get the water streams how I needed them, but hey, at least my little brain was enriched, right? Now it was time to build the actual spawning platforms. The first step here was to build the platform itself, followed by placing in a series of carpets which prevent spiders from spawning. From there, you simply head down, grab a cat, lure it up to the center of the platform because creepers are scared of these little guys, and then you just repeat the process over and over and over, making sure to also go through and add trapdoors to the roof, which will ensure no zombies, skeletons, or otherwise other tall boys will spawn here, as well as along the edges, which ensures the creepers will actually want to yeet themselves off. This was a process that took me the next 4 days to finish. Partially because 12 layers is a lot to build, and also because, like I said before, I am awful at planning and had to regularly go back and collect more materials. But finally, on day 39, I began construction of the massive roof above the farm. You see, creepers, like really any mob in this game, need complete darkness to spawn, and this will ensure my farm is running at maximum efficiency. And finally, after nearly 2 hours of work, the farm was fully operational. Well, this is anticlimactic. They're not coming. Why aren't they coming? What's going on? Yeah, it didn't work. Either I built something wrong, or all of the creepers in my world just decided that, you know what, they're actually cool with cats. So, against my sanity, I checked out the classic tutorial from Logical Geek Boy, which this farm is pretty basely loosed on anyways, only to realize I still need more blocks outside that the creepers think they can walk onto. So that night, I moseyed my way carefully down through the platforms, replacing torches to turn off the Oh Jesus, I just hit my cat. Before getting back to work on the platform extensions on day 40. I was already regretting my decision to slaughter all of my sheep earlier in the video, since now I was out of carpets. So I spent the rest of that evening collecting more sheep in a holding pen, before leaving myself this handy dandy reference sign, so I would actually remember what the heck I was doing upon logging back in the next day. The next day, coincidentally, both in-game and real life, I had a different idea about how to get some wool. So I set off exploring instead. I took a quick little pit stop at this nearby village, but found nothing more than some leather armor, not sure what that's good for, before raiding their crop fields and heading out to shear some sheep in the wild, because I need wool and I need it now. In fact, doing this gave me even a better idea to get my grubby melon hands on even more wool, but this one involved a more dangerous trip to the ancient city, which honestly I wasn't all too thrilled about, but I knew would be well worth it. Just as I expected, there was no shortage of wool here. But what I didn't expect was to find another ancient city directly connected to the first one. I honestly have never seen this before. I didn't even know it was possible. But that's about enough excitement for me down here. After all, the goal is to not have a panic attack during this playthrough. Luckily for me though, I finally had enough materials to finish the platform extensions on day 42, and so the next day I once again made my my way down through the farm, removing torch after torch. And finally, my friends, I had yet again succeeded at making another mediocre farm inside of this hardcore world. And I spent the remainder of that day slaughtering creepers and celebrating my new accomplishment. The next day, I made one final improvement to stop the creepers from clipping the edges when I had quite a philosophical thought. Something about this does not feel very safe. It is almost as if I am yes, that was quite a deep thought for my little brain to rationalize. Anyways, I spent a while longer hacking away to collect more gunpowder before heading out to collect some copper, which I will need for my next quest. In true Brock fashion, it's time we see what the new Minecraft 20 update has to offer, only 3 months late to the party. So I crafted myself a brush and set off in search of gravel and sand that gave me the side eye. Oh, hang on, now you look a little suspicious, my friend. Oh, never mind. I think I hit the wrong button. Oh, I have to go this way. Oh, okay. Good to know. A wooden hoe. Wow, that is so good. The golden nugget. Wow, okay. Really coming through with that good loot. Take me out to dinner next time before you spoil me this much, game. As much as I love hoes, I was after something a bit more rare here. I did a quick research to find that sniffer eggs can actually only be dug up in warm oceans. So I set off that night to find just that. Dude, do they only bury wooden hoes in these things? Oh, hang on. I think I just found something. Yes! This is what I wanted. Let's go, baby. I finally had 2 of these little sniffer eggs, which is infinitely better than just one of them, because now I can actually breed these suckers. I should also mention that while I was out, I managed to scavenge some beetroot seeds from a village, so I could finally begin adding that into my crop area. The next day, I went through adding in these fun spruce slab details around the farming area before continuing my expansions of the crop fields. I pretty much just spent the entirety of today going through and hoeing the entire area, and then going back through to make sure none of the ground was thirsty. I did make one trip out to sea that evening to collect some moss from a shipwreck, which will come in handy with my sniffy boys here very soon. On the way home, I made a quick pit stop at the creeper farm to gather 30 levels before heading home and beginning a new build. In usual fashion, I just started digging out an archway and placing in blocks, despite the fact that I had no idea what I was doing at this point. Before long though, the archway was looking pretty good, so I went inside and began clearing out the area that I will go on to call the smelly cave. That's all I could think of? Okay, whatever. Like the unprepared, soon-to-be father of twins that I am, I frantically purchased some name tags the next morning before getting back to work digging. Oh, it's cracking. I think the eggs are hatching, you guys. Oh my god, we have one. Let's go. How you doing? Oh my god, there's 2 of them. I shall name you Smelly, and I shall name you Nelly. Completely ashamed of the living conditions that my new children were living in, I frantically continued to work on clearing the inside room. The next morning, though, while repairing my tools, I had quite the interesting run-in with one of my librarians. No, get back in there. There's nowhere for you to go up here. Do you want to come with me? If you really want to, I think I can have a spot for you. I'll tell you what, if you make it up this ladder, I will... Okay, you made it up the ladder. Without hesitation, I brought this man into the smelly cave. God, that still sounds so wrong to say. I shall name you Bruce, and Bruce, you will commit your life to studying the sniffers. Later that day, I chopped down some trees and also dyed my sheep red, since I eventually planned to make Bruce a proper research tent, and red just seems like the right color for that. Day 51 was a fun day of random shenanigans. I started out that morning planting some crops before realizing my time would be better spent collecting moss, so I could begin decorating the sniffer cave. After all, I do want this place to actually look cool. Sniffers can sniff up ancient plants on a bunch of different blocks, including mud, so I spent that afternoon at the nearby river collecting some the old-fashioned way. I like to imagine that my man Bruce was the first person to discover sniffers, so for the floor I wanted to go through with a bunch of the different sniffable blocks, as if he's been doing like a bunch of extensive research and testing. And speaking of Bruce, I soon got to work on his cabin of research, which, I'll be honest, is just a triangle hut made from this red wool. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but then again, Bruce is a pretty simple man. I spent that night continuing to expand my crop fields with more beetroot before committing arson. Yeah, I burned this man alive. With all of the iron golems sufficiently burned, I was able to spend the next morning fully planting in my crop fields. At this point, I'm still planting everything in these rows, which does make the crops grow in faster, but at the downside of potentially looking like hot garbage. But I won't know how I feel about that until much later. I took a pit stop back in the Smelly Cave to witness both Smelly and Nellie's first sniff. It's the moments like these that make me such a proud parent. I spent the rest of that evening repairing my tools at the creeper farm. Upon my flight back home, though, I got thinking that a beacon would do me well with all of this digging that I've been doing. So I made myself a shield and set off to the Nether. In theory, this should be a pretty straightforward process when you factor in that my Nether portal is basically inside of this here Nether fortress. So I lowered my render distance to hopefully increase spawn rates a bit and got searching for the wither skeletons. I really don't know who I pissed off to make this happen, but I searched that entire fortress left, right, and center for 15 minutes straight and didn't find a single mob, let alone a wither skeleton. Feeling a bit defeated, I set off to the nearby Soul Sand Valley to get some bone blocks, since I don't really have a good skeleton farm yet. Actually, I don't have any skeleton farm yet. I did manage to find another fortress though, this one with a couple of wither skeletons, but no luck on beheading any of them, unfortunately. Back at home, I took an opportunity to clear out a few more layers of the central hole while also collecting some moss, which is basically my fastest way to get rid of blocks right now with Haste 2 being out of the question. Nelson and Smelson have been hard at work sniffing blocks, which finally meant that I had 2 of the torch flowers needed to breed them. To think that I'm going to be a grandparent, you guys. Can you believe it? Oh, also, Bruce has moved into his cabin officially, where I intend for him to live forever. It was finally time to put all of that moss I just collected to good use. So, after collecting a bit more cobblestone, I was ready to finish the decoration of the Smelly Cave. I wanted the walls to start off with moss at the bottom and then slowly transition to the darker blocks near the ceiling, which I thought would be a pretty nice little gradient in here. I did have to make a trip down into the caves to get a bit more deep slate, but besides that, decoration was coming along smoothly, and by the end of day 57, all of the walls were built up. On day 58, I did some enchanting and said hi to my librarians to make myself an efficiency 4 silk touch hoe, which I immediately put to good use collecting up some azalea leaves. These leaves, along with a few lanterns for lighting, added some nice details to the cave as well. I really can't figure out why the hell Smelly and Nellie were doing this, but they would not get off of Bruce's cabin that evening, almost as if they were trying to implode it on top of him. Now pretty worried for his safety, I spent a bit that evening reinforcing the base and moving him to a safer spot in the corner. Feeling pretty excited now about having access to the ancient flowers, I started laying out dedicated farming areas for pitcher pods and the torch flower seeds. I'll be honest, I've been so out of the loop with Minecraft in the last few months that I thought for certain you could bone meal these flowers and get more of them that way. I guess the good news is that I figured out this information on day 59, meaning that Nellie and Smelly still have plenty of time to keep digging up more plants to hopefully fill up these fields before day 100. Actually, I'm just kidding. I think we all know that if I really want to get enough of these plants for my needs, then I will need to set up a bootleg sniffer farm using all of their offspring. So I started digging out a massive room right behind Bruce's tent. I don't know, I just like to imagine he's the ringleader of this very highly secret operation. Considering I was now having so much fun just completely winging this playthrough, I decided to build this sniffer farm completely on my own. After all, I really don't think it should be that complicated. I can't express to you how much more fun it is for me to play the game this way as opposed to just following tutorials for everything like I've definitely been guilty of in the past. Anyways, by now the minecart tracks were in place and I was realizing I would need some powered rails to actually make this bad boy work. So I set off caving in search of some redstone and gold. While I was down there, I also managed to find a geode and a zombie spawner, which I have no idea if I'll actually ever use, but hey, it's good to know, I guess. And all of that mining sure did come in handy, because I now had all of the powered rails I would need to finish this farm. The basic idea here I had in mind was that anytime a sniffer would dig something up, the hopper minecart below would suck it up through the block and output it into this chest. I went through filling in the layer above the minecart with dirt before digging out another layer of the ceiling and breeding Smelly and Nelly once more to plant a couple of eggs into the farm. I was going just a wee bit insane being cooped up inside all day though, so that night I started laying out a pumpkin patch. Next to that, I decided to put my 3 melon seeds to use and start the humble beginnings of a melon farm before stopping back at the sniffer farm to see we already had a baby in there. I spent a good chunk of that afternoon just running around my base, observing the area, and honestly thinking. I don't know if you can relate to this or not, but so many of my good ideas come from doing this. It's kind of therapeutic in a way. And in doing this, I realized that something just felt off. I had no idea exactly what the problem was right now, but my gut just felt like the pathways were in the wrong place. So I began by removing all of them. Once again, feeling the need to get rid of everything I owned, I had to do something about this sheep pen in the middle of my base. But as opposed to committing mass murder for the second time this video, I thought these guys were maybe more deserving of a proper home. So I broke them free and moved them into one of the sectioned off areas that I made earlier. One task at a time, I started solving problems. The first issue I had run into was that my crop fields were way too small. So using more oak leaves, I began laying out much larger areas to grow them in. I quickly realized in doing this that my storage system, consisting of 4 random unorganized chests in the middle of the area, was not really an ideal way of playing this game. So it was time to also do something about that. I had the idea to store organic blocks like moss, dirt, and the different stones right here inside the smelly cave with the sniffers, especially considering that many of these blocks were used in the construction of this place to begin with. As for everything else, well, I know that getting a proper storage system in place wasn't really in the cards for this 100 days playthrough, but honestly, anything would be better than what I had right now. So I began digging out a little nook into the side of this wall, which would serve as the temporary place to put everything. And now the only thing in between me and being organized was my own lack of self-control, which I'll admit was quite the risk to take, but I'm trying to be better, damn it. Days 64 and 65 were probably the most boring days in this entire playthrough, as I basically spent the entirety of them just moving items from one chest to another chest. But honestly, I feel like this is the price I pay for being so disorganized all the time. I will admit though, it did feel pretty dang good having everything put away. Despite the fact that my bootleg sniffer farm had now built up a decent population of workers, the farm was not producing any items yet. So in a feeble attempt to make this thing work, I did the only thing I could think of and dug out the ceiling by 1 more block because I don't know why, but I just did. I have no idea if this actually did anything or if it was just some crazy coincidence, but I swear to God, the next morning I caught the first sniffer actually doing something here in the farm. So despite my newfound confidence, the farm was fully operational. With my clutter finally out of the way as well, I was able to put the outline for the final crop field in as well. And so I got to work. I decided having so many different crops planted so close to one another just looked messy and caused my eyes to have no idea what I was looking at. So instead, I went through and made this entire field one big carrot farm. And even though it's not even grown in at this point, I can already tell it was making the area feel so much better. So using the same idea, I turned this area into a massive wheat field. That night, I continued breeding up my sniffer army, which at this point is getting pretty ridiculous in size, before expanding on the melon farm that I had forgotten about completely. I also had to dispatch this Enderman who made quite the mess with dirt blocks inside of my storage cave here. I spent the entire next day continuing my farm field expansions. This third area I decided would be a massive field of beetroot. Look, I'm done pretending that this is like the worst crop in the game, you guys. I mean, sure, it's pretty damn useless in terms of functionality, but I must admit, there's just something about a giant beetroot field that looks so nice. Unfortunately though, my villagers are directly below this area, and despite the fact that I have built them a literal safe house down there, they constantly feel the need to spawn iron golems on the surface to protect them. I had to spend the entire afternoon that day killing all of these guys though, since they have a terrible habit of trampling all of my crops. By day 69, all of the new crop areas were planted, and I was so much happier with how this place was looking. I finally finished planting in the melon field that evening when I had another run-in with the wandering trader who sold me some cactus, which is honestly good because I've yet to find a desert out in these parts. I then kindly asked him to get the hell off my property. I finished off that night going through, adding detail to the pumpkin and melon patches with some podzol, corster, and azalea leaves, which round out the area quite nicely if I do say so myself. Having spent way too much time lately playing Stardew Valley, I frantically started building scarecrows the next day. Even though these won't add any function to the base, I'm definitely going to keep them because they are cute and I like them. You can really tell at this point that I was getting back into the Minecraft groove because for the first time in this 100 days playthrough, I decided to actually build something outside. It's so sad that that's true. I kept this one pretty simple as a cute little house here in the carrot field, but honestly, I have no idea what to put inside here, so if you have any ideas, let me know. With the new house in place though, I thought I should revisit the idea of pathways since I would need a way to properly navigate around this place. That night, I also realized I never put any scarecrows here in the carrot field, so after building up more of those, I installed another pathway through the field leading up to the storage barn. Honestly, I like these paths way more than the ones I built previously. Unfortunately, my villagers were continuing to spawn iron golems, so it was time to do something about that. I already knew going into this playthrough that I wasn't going to keep this weird basement place as their permanent home, so I was fine moving them anyways, and I liked the idea of having them eventually live in the very center of the base here for reasons I will get to later, but for now, I started digging out a tunnel that leads to the central hole. I also took some time that evening to just fly around and appreciate the progress I've made so far in this place, before getting to work planting the actual pitcher pod and torch flower field, now that the sniffer farm was doing its thing. I would love to show you some footage of me actually moving all of the villagers to their new home, but yeah, I didn't record anything on day 73, but just take my word for it when I say they are now all inside of this box. I promise we will eventually give them a proper home, but today is not that day. Luckily though, they don't seem very fazed by the move, so after a quick librarian trade, I was able to get mending on my axe and spend the remainder of the day at the creeper farm repairing that along with the rest of my tools. I was finally at a place though where my lack of deep slate was becoming quite the problem, but instead of just diving into the nearby caves and continuing to collect it that way like a peasant, I knew it was time to take a different approach to the matter. So yet again, my 3 brain cells did their thing and gave me the idea to dig out another hole into the sidewall here, this time to create a mine shaft. I kept the outside design of this thing pretty darn simple if I do say so myself, but as far as the inside, I dug out this winding cave and decorated the walls with moss, cobblestone, and lots of different dirt to make this feel like a proper entrance. It also gave me a pretty easy way to make the mine shaft look good for the time being and hide the fact that right now, it's basically just a massive staircase down to deep slate level. And I pretty much just spent the entirety of that day digging my way down, trying my best to cover up these safety hazards that kept presenting themselves. I also can't say that I was exactly thrilled to see this cave was covered in skulk, but luckily I was able to ignore it for the time being and find myself some diamonds. The sniffer farm was working overtime at this point, so I spent the morning of day 77 filling in more of my pitcher pod and torch flower fields, which I have to admit look pretty dang good and have been worth the wait. That afternoon, however, I was looking to continue my farming expansion, so I set off in search of sweet berries at the nearby taiga biome. Look, in terms of function, we all know these things are about as useful as a wet paper towel, but I thought they would make for a pretty cool vineyard back here at the base. So that night, I started prepping the area and going through planting the berries in rows, not just so it looks cool, but so I can actually harvest them. By now, I had quite the craving for some steak, so I set off to befriend some local cows in hopes of gaining their trust and one day slaughtering them. I'm playing the long game though, so for now, I just lured them into this nice holding area next to my sheep field. After planting planting even more torch flowers that afternoon, I decided now would be a good time to start frameworking another building here in the wheat field. The only goal for right now was to get a good shape in place because I could easily go through and fill in the details in the walls later. And by nightfall, I was quite pleased with what I had built so far. I also quickly realized that harvesting sweet berries was shaping up to be quite the difficult task. So I spent the rest of that evening covering them in spruce slab, which still allows me to harvest them while keeping the thorns out of my feet. After finishing the framework for the vineyard the next day, I spent the entire day chopping wood. That's it. That's all I did. It was day 80, baby. And at this point in the challenge, I was completely dialed in, just building my heart away without a care in the world, honestly. It almost feels like I blacked out and remember very little from this time, just simply because I was so damn immersed in what I was doing. And for the first time in about 6 months, I felt that spark coming back in my hardcore world. That same spark that helped me transform a village way back at the very beginning. I was spending less time thinking about what I wanted to do and more time just doing it. And it got me thinking, this whole time I was worried I was falling out of love with my Minecraft world or getting burnt out, but the reality was that I was just invested in other areas of the game, or honestly even life. Quick little story time. You see, back in July, I got invited by my buddy Lagundo to try out for MCC Rising, which is this awesome opportunity where new creators get to compete in the Minecraft Championship. Obviously, I was down. So that weekend, my teammates and I stayed up super late making an application video, submitting it, and nervously awaiting to hear back. It's also important to note that there were thousands of applications, but only 10 teams would make it in. And we were one of them. In just 3 short weeks, I would be competing in one of the biggest Minecraft tournaments ever, having never played an ounce of PvP or parkour in my life. And while obviously placement doesn't really matter, I just wanted to make damn sure I didn't embarrass myself here. So I grinded. I spent so many hours the next few weeks learning parkour courses, practicing ungodly amounts of PvP, and watching VODs from old MCCs to learn strategies. Hell, the week before the event, I got access to the Ace Race training map, which might not mean much to you, but oh my god, it became my addiction. Honestly, the entire MCC training, the build-up, and the event was all that I thought about for almost an entire month. And hands down, it was one of the coolest experiences and most fun I have ever had in Minecraft. And then it was over. And here I was, back in my hardcore world, alone, and just sort of lost. What I'm trying to say here is that this whole time when I thought I was getting burnt out or tired of hardcore Minecraft, that's not really true. The reality was that I just wasn't fully in it. I wasn't fully immersed. And I realized that immersion is like the single most important thing for me to keep coming back and having fun playing this game. Anyways, yeah, that was a lot of emotions. Oh my god, look at this cute little house that I built for my bees. I spent the afternoon of day 83 filling in the supporting walls and other details to the new house that I had built in the wheat field before setting off to the cherry grove that evening to search for bee nests to start filling up my new sanctuary. Now, I have no idea if I got lucky or if these are just way more common here, but I found 4 bee nests basically right in this immediate area. And it's a good thing I did, because that night, like a true Nimrod, I managed to successfully piss off my entire new population of bees by harvesting their nests without a campfire below. The next day was a rainy mess, but you're out of your mind if you think that was going to stop me from finishing this house. Day 85 is up there with my favorite days of this playthrough. You see, while I was making babies with Smelly and Melly, that sounded so weird, I found myself unsure of what to name their offspring. So I asked you guys for some suggestions. And of the 265 submissions at the time of this commentary, I'm happy to welcome Gooberschmack and Finkelnary to the family. I also totally named Bruce Gooberschmack for a second, but hey, that's alright. Luckily for me, a few of my bees were still alive after the incident, so I was able to breed them now. I wanted to go through and take some inspiration from the pathways we created in the carrot field and expand them into the wheat and beetroot fields as well, especially now that we had some buildings constructed. That night, I killed Bruce. Look, I have my reasons, okay? And I guess killed isn't really the correct term. It's more so that I lured a zombie in and had him turn to a zombie villager. You see, we are going to be attempting a raid very soon, and I can't risk my boy Bruce actually dying, so this is the next best option. At this point, there was just one more patch of land on the outskirts to be filled with something, and I knew just what to put there. I derped around the next morning, adding a few more scarecrows to the wheat field since I forgot to do that earlier. I also realized at this point there was still a wheat field inside of the house itself. So after removing that and filling in a more socially acceptable floor, I installed this small archway and a few furnaces. Look at me doing interiors, aren't you guys so proud? Although the base was looking pretty good at this point, I found it severely lacking contrast in the brown department. So I spent the entirety of the next day stripping each and every oak log in the wall, which honestly did a great job. The buildings stand out a lot more now. Remember those terrace farms I built earlier in the video? Yeah, me either. Because I finally remembered that I now plan to fill those in with more torch flowers and pitcher pods. I'm honestly just glad that I remembered here on day 88 as opposed to just completely forgetting like I normally would. The rest of that day was honestly pretty boring. I just chopped wood and built up the outside wall a bit taller. That's okay though, because it was finally time to get working on the part of the base that I was most excited for. In fact, earlier when I said that I wanted to design this base such that it would be really hard for me to die, I meant a little bit more than just building up a derpy wall on the outside. Now, if you recall a bit earlier, you know that I've moved all of my villagers to the center of this hole, and the plan is to turn this area into a makeshift raid farm with a trap for all of the pillagers and other raid mobs. And that plan started right here with this massive trench I was digging around the outside. While doing this, I made sure to slope the terrain down on each side to a couple of low points. That way I could go back through and flood the area with water, which would serve as a pretty easy way to funnel anything that falls into it. I'll be honest, it's not my brightest idea, but I'm pretty confident I can make this work. From there, I went through slabbing off the inner ring to prevent spawns, and adding in trapdoors just like I used in the creeper farm earlier. I easily could have just left this alone right here. But the idea of having this massive trench in the middle of the base be completely undecorated was just bothering me. So I started things off at the bottom, going through replacing the stone with cobbled deep slate to serve as a darker block. Of course though, I was yet again out of it, so I had to spend a while down in the mines collecting some. I also grabbed some tuff while I was down there before going through with a couple layers of that just a bit further up. And lastly, to complete the gradient, I added in some cobblestone and some mossy cobblestone near the very top. At the risk of sounding like a complete hypocrite right now, I decided to leave the center completely unfinished, since I have more ideas for what to build here that extend way beyond these 100 days, unfortunately. On day 93, I handled this eager test subject inside of the trench before setting off to the Nether to grab myself some soul sand. I then used that soul sand to make soul campfires, which would serve as the killing mechanism along with hoppers and chests to collect the output. I then spent the rest of that evening adding in these floating lava blocks, which I hoped would handle any ravagers that fall into this thing. And just like that, I think I just made a raid farm. Sort of. Kind of. I spent the next day going through spawn-proofing the inside of all of my buildings with buttons, like a fool, because I failed to realize that raid mobs can only spawn under skylight, as well as adding in some ladders down to my collection chests. The only thing left to do now was improve my gear a bit. If there's one thing I know about myself, it's that the farms I design on my own usually don't work very well. So I wanted an infinity bow just in case I needed some extra help during the upcoming raid. So I spent the rest of day 94 and unfortunately most of day 95 at the creeper farm re-rolling enchantment after enchantment after enchantment until eventually infinity came up. On day 96, I did one final preparation and built myself a safe platform above the center of the village out of glass, which would not only hopefully protect me from danger, but also allow me to see what the heck is going on. All right, well, I think it's time. I'm not really excited about this, but I do want a totem, so we kind of have to do it. I think the water stream's going to be a good idea. It's really stupid, that's for sure, but it might work, hopefully. And so, on day 97, I paid a visit to our pillager captain friend we captured way back at the beginning of the playthrough, and before I knew it, the raid was starting. Okay, it's happening. All right, let me get up to my spot, and they spawned outside. Are you actually kidding me? All right, they're falling into our trap, guys. Hang on. It's not the most efficient thing I've ever done, but it seems to be working. Ooh, they're on top this time. Okay, interesting strategy. Things were going great until a ravager showed up. Oh, my crop fields! No, dude! Get in there. Each wave of the raid spawns more and more mobs, and my trap was honestly working pretty good as long as the raiders actually got in the base, which wasn't saying much because they pretty much exclusively spawned outside. I did manage to see an evoker fall in it though, which was a huge victory. I also had this happen. Oh my god, are they falling on my iron golem pit? Are they all falling on my iron golem pit? What is happening? Oh my god, they just all fell in the hole. Look, I'm glad it worked out, but I am a bit salty I spent so long digging out this trench just for my iron farm to completely steal the show. And before long, the raid was complete. Well, kind of. It's gotta be in here. It had to have like fallen in the cave. I have no idea what to say though, I have no words because I can't find it anywhere. I'll be honest, I have no idea how this happened. I spent the entirety of day 98 and half of day 99 just searching around the entire base, even resorting to ringing a bell to try and find the last raid mob, and nothing. So I spent the rest of that day filling up holes in the base and replanting my crop fields where the ravagers got through. I did take some time that evening to kill a couple witches in the event that they were the last mob, but no luck. And by the end of the night, the raid had unfortunately timed out, which really didn't bother me since I got my totem anyways. And finally, I spent the entirety of day 100 back in the mines paying homage to my younger self. You see, what I didn't tell you about that summer I spent grinding for diamonds as a kid was that pretty much as soon as I became rich, I would just get bored, delete the world, and then do the entire thing again. It turns out I wasn't really after the diamonds, I was just after a journey. And while I may never look at Minecraft with the pure excitement I did as a kid, honestly that's okay, because I know at the end of the day that Minecraft didn't change. I just did.